In the spring of 1925, a well-dressed man sat in a hired car at the foot of the Eiffel Tower and watched 6 of the richest scrap metal dealers in Paris crane their necks up at 7,000 tons of iron. He had told them the government wanted to tear it down. He had told them it was a secret. And in a few days, one of those 6 men would hand him a fortune in cash for the right to demolish a tower that did not belong to him, that France would never have sold, and that he had no power on earth to deliver. He would take the money, board a train, and vanish. And here is the part nobody believes when they first hear it. A few months later, he would come back to Paris and try to sell the very same tower all over again. His name, the name on the forged government stationery anyway, was Count Victor Lustig. It was not his real name. Almost nothing about him was real. Over the course of his life, he would use something like 45 different aliases, speak 5 languages without an accent that gave him away, and talk his way into and out of rooms that should have destroyed him. He swindled bankers in Vienna. He fleeced gamblers on the great ocean liners. He once conned Al Capone, the most dangerous man in America, and walked away alive with Capone, thanking him for his honesty. But of all the long cons in his career, one stands above the rest. It is the one historians still shake their heads at, the one that put him in the record books for good. This is the story of how a man with no factory, no permit, and no shame sold the most famous landmark in the world, twice. And it is also the story of how the smoothest liar of his age was finally undone, not by a clever detective, but by something he could never quite control. To understand how anyone could possibly fall for it, you have to understand Paris in 1925, and you have to understand the tower itself. The Eiffel Tower was not yet the beloved monument we picture today. When Gustave Eiffel built it for the World's Fair of 1889, a lot of Parisians hated it. Artists signed petitions calling it a hideous skeleton of iron, a street lamp gone monstrous, a blot on the city of light. It was never supposed to be permanent. The original agreement gave it about 20 years, after which the city had every right to take it down and sell off the metal. By the time the 1920s rolled around, that 20-year clock had run out and then some. The tower had survived only because the army found it useful as a radio antenna. And it was expensive. The iron rusted. It needed paint, tons of paint, every few years. And the bill for keeping it standing kept climbing. Newspapers ran stories about the cost. People wrote letters to the editor asking whether the whole thing was worth it. The future of the tower was, genuinely, an open question in the public mind. Victor Lustig read one of those newspaper stories in his suite, and the wheels began to turn. He was 35 years old, born in 1890, in a small town in Bohemia, in what was then Austria-Hungary, the son of a respectable family. He had a long, narrow face, a scar on his left cheek, and dark eyes that people described as burning, the kind of eyes that made you feel he was reading your thoughts. He dressed like minor royalty. He carried himself like a man who had never once in his life worried about money, which was exactly the impression a confidence man needs to give, because the whole art of the con rests on a simple piece of human nature. We trust people who seem not to need us. We let our guard down around success. Lustig had learned, somewhere on the gambling boats of the Atlantic, that the surest way to take a man's money is to make him believe he is the one getting the better of you. So he read that the city of Paris was struggling to maintain the Eiffel Tower, and a plan assembled itself in his mind, fully formed, audacious, almost insane. What if the government had decided, quietly, to scrap it? What if the city could not bear the cost any longer, and rather than face an outcry, it intended to sell the tower for its metal in secret? It was just plausible enough. The tower really was a financial headache. It really had been built as a temporary structure. A man who followed the news could believe, if a credible official told him so face to face, that the unthinkable was about to happen. That was the genius of it. Lustig did not invent a fantasy out of thin air. He took a real anxiety that was already floating around the city and gave it a shape, a deadline, and a price tag. The first thing he needed was paper. Authority in 1925 was made of paper, of letterhead and seals and titles, and Lustig knew a forger who could manufacture all of it. He had stationery printed up for the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs, the government office that, conveniently, did oversee the tower's radio transmitter. He gave himself a title that sounded important and was impossible to check on short notice: Deputy Director General. Then he wrote letters, formal and discreet, on that beautiful forged letterhead, and sent them to 5 of the leading scrap metal dealers in Paris. The letters invited each man to a confidential meeting at the Hôtel de Crillon. The choice of hotel was itself part of the con. The Crillon sat on the Place de la Concorde, one of the oldest and most prestigious addresses in the city, the kind of place where governments quietly conducted business they did not want in the papers. A swindler operating out of a cheap room would have raised eyebrows. By summoning these men to the Crillon, Lustig borrowed the credibility of the building. The address did half his lying for him before he ever opened his mouth. The dealers arrived. They were ushered into a private room, and there sat the Deputy Director General, surrounded by documents, grave and apologetic, a government man burdened by a difficult duty. He swore them to secrecy. The matter, he explained, was extremely delicate. The state had reached a decision it knew the public would not like. The Eiffel Tower, he told them, had been judged too costly to maintain and too unsafe to keep. It was structurally finished. The repairs alone would bankrupt the city. After careful study, the government had resolved to dismantle it and sell the iron, all 7,000 tons of it, to a single private contractor. Because of the public's sentimental attachment to the thing, the sale had to be handled with the utmost discretion. No announcements, no leaks. Whoever won the contract would simply begin taking it down, and the deed would be done before anyone could mount a protest. You have to imagine the silence in that room. These were serious businessmen, and Lustig was handing them the scrap contract of the century. 7,000 tons of wrought iron was worth a great deal of money. The man who got it would be set for life and famous besides. Nobody stood up and called him a fraud. Nobody asked for his credentials. They sat there, hearts pounding, calculating, each one wanting to believe he was about to be chosen. Then Lustig did something brilliant. He rented a chauffeured car, gathered the dealers, and drove them out to the tower for an inspection, the way a real official conducting a real sale would have done. He let them walk around the base. He let them look up at the riveted iron and the 4 great legs. He talked numbers and logistics, all the while watching their faces, reading them, sorting the eager from the cautious, the sharp from the soft. He was not really showing them the tower. He was hunting. He was looking for his mark, and he found him. His name was André Poisson. Poisson was a scrap dealer, but he was something more useful to a con man than rich. He was insecure. He was relatively new to the upper tier of Parisian business, an outsider who badly wanted in, who longed to be one of the important men of the city, and felt, painfully, that he was not yet taken seriously by the established circles. Lustig had a gift for spotting exactly this kind of hunger. A confident man asks too many questions. A satisfied man does not need the deal badly enough to ignore the warning signs, but a man who is desperate to prove himself, a man who sees in one transaction the chance to leap to the front rank of his world, that man will talk himself into anything. He will explain away every doubt because the prize is not just iron. The prize is to finally matter. Lustig singled out Poisson and let him feel chosen. He met with him privately. He flattered him, drew him close, made him feel that, of all the dealers, Poisson was the one the government trusted. The contract was as good as his. But Madame Poisson, André's wife, was not so easily charmed. She had questions. Why all the secrecy? Why the rush? Why had they never heard of this Deputy Director General? Why was a government selling off a national landmark in a hotel room instead of through the official channels everyone knew? These were exactly the right questions. If anyone in this story had clear eyes, it was she. Lustig saw the danger and met it head-on. And what he did next is the move that separates a great con artist from a merely good one. He arranged another private meeting, and instead of pretending to be more honest, he pretended to be more corrupt. He leaned in, dropped the official mask just a little, and confided in Poisson as one schemer to another. The truth, he said, was that a government salary was a miserable thing. A man in his position, handling deals worth millions, was paid a pittance and expected to live like a gentleman. Surely Poisson, a man of the world, understood how these things really worked. Surely he understood that to make the contract happen smoothly, there would need to be a small consideration, a little something for the official who had chosen him. In other words, Lustig asked for a bribe. And that request, which should have been the most alarming thing of all, was the thing that erased every doubt. Because now Lustig was not a too-good-to-be-true government angel. He was a familiar figure, a grubby bureaucrat with his hand out, exactly the kind of corrupt official that any businessman of 1925 had dealt with 100 times. The bribe made it real. A con man asking for a bribe felt more trustworthy than a saint, because it fit the world as people knew it to be. Poisson's suspicions melted. His wife's questions were answered. This was simply how business got done in France, and the price of admission to the inner circle was a quiet envelope of cash. Poisson agreed. He signed the contract for the tower, and he paid. The figures that come down to us are not perfectly consistent, but the sums were enormous. By most accounts, he handed over more than 1,000,000 francs for the contract itself, and on top of that, a bribe of around 70,000 francs to grease the wheels. In today's money, the whole haul ran to the equivalent of several $100,000, all of it in cash, all of it for a tower that was not for sale and never had been. Lustig took the money and was gone. Some say he was on a train to Vienna within the hour, the cash packed in a suitcase, leaving Poisson with a worthless contract and the bill for a demolition that would never come. Now, here is where most swindlers would simply count their winnings and lie low. Lustig waited in Austria for the storm to break. He read the French papers, expecting to see his own face, expecting a manhunt, scandal, his description on every police desk in Paris. The storm never came, and the reason it never came is the cruelest and most human part of the whole affair. André Poisson, when he finally understood what had happened to him, did not go to the police. He could not bring himself to do it. The shame was unbearable. Here was a man who had spent his whole career trying to be respected, trying to climb into the company of important men, and he had just been fleeced like a rube, handed over a fortune for the Eiffel Tower, of all things. If it came out, he would not be a victim. He would be a punchline. He would be the scrap dealer who bought the tower, laughed at in every cafe in Paris for the rest of his days. He decided that the money was gone, and that his dignity was worth more than the money. He swallowed the loss and said nothing. Lustig had not just robbed his mark. He had read him so completely that he knew the man would protect him out of pride. The con was built, from the very first letter, around a victim too ashamed to cry out. For most criminals, that silence would have been a gift to be quietly enjoyed. For Lustig, it was an invitation. Think about the nerve this required. He had gotten away clean. No one was looking for him. The smart play, the safe play, was to never think about the Eiffel Tower again. Instead, Lustig looked at his own escape and saw an opportunity that no sane person would have taken. If Poisson had been too embarrassed to talk, then the city of Paris still did not know the tower had ever been sold. The con was still fresh. The mark was still a secret. Why not run it again? So he went back to Paris, the same city, the same scheme. He printed fresh stationery, became the deputy director general once more, and sent out a new round of confidential letters to a new set of scrap dealers. He sat them down, swore them to secrecy, told them the government had decided in its discretion to scrap the Eiffel Tower and sell the iron. He drove them out for the inspection. He hunted for the eager one, the insecure one, the one who wanted it too much. He found a mark and worked him toward the sale. This time, it did not hold. This buyer, or someone close to the deal, grew suspicious and started checking the story before the money changed hands. And the moment anyone made a serious inquiry, the whole thing fell apart, because there was nothing underneath it. No ministry decision, no deputy director general. The questions reached the actual police, and Paris finally understood that someone had been selling the Eiffel Tower in its hotels. Lustig caught the scent of danger just in time. He did not wait to be arrested. He boarded a ship and crossed the Atlantic to America, where the law did not know his face and the marks were fresh. He had sold the Eiffel Tower twice. He got away with it both times. And neither sale ever brought him to trial, because one victim was too ashamed to speak and the other realized the truth a beat too early to lose his cash. Out of 2 attempts to sell the most famous structure on Earth, Victor Lustig walked away free, rich, and uncaught. In America, he found a country made for him. The 1920s and the early Depression years were a golden age for the confidence man. People were chasing easy money, banks were failing, fortunes were rising and vanishing overnight, and a smooth-talking European count with perfect manners could open almost any door. Lustig moved through it like a shark through warm water. His signature American con was a device he called the Romanian box, and it was almost as cheeky as the tower. It was a beautiful little cabinet of polished mahogany, fitted with brass dials and rollers, and a narrow slot. Lustig would explain, in a low and confidential voice, that the box was a secret machine for duplicating currency. You slid a genuine $100 bill into the slot, along with a blank sheet of special paper, turned the dials, and waited. The chemical process, he said, took about 6 hours. Then the box would produce a perfect, spendable copy of the bill. Real money, doubled, out of thin air. To prove it, he would put a real $100 bill into the box in front of the mark, send him away to wait the required 6 hours, and when the man returned, Lustig would open the cabinet and hand him 2 genuine $100 bills. They were both real, of course. Lustig had simply hidden a second real bill inside the machine ahead of time. But the mark, holding 2 perfect notes that the bank would happily accept, lost his mind with greed. He would beg to buy the box, and Lustig, reluctant, would eventually allow himself to be persuaded to part with his miraculous machine for a fortune, often tens of thousands of dollars. By the time the buyer figured out that his money-printing miracle only spat out the few real bills Lustig had loaded into it, and then nothing at all, the count was long gone. The 6-hour delay was not a quirk of the chemistry. It was a head start. He once unloaded one of these boxes on a county sheriff, who was so enraged when it stopped working that he tracked Lustig all the way to Chicago. Lustig, the story goes, talked the furious lawman down by convincing him he was simply operating the box wrong, and then handed him a stack of counterfeit bills to make him go away. The sheriff later got arrested trying to spend them. Which brings us to the most dangerous mark Lustig ever chose, and the con that proves he understood human nature better than anyone of his generation. Al Capone. By the late 1920s, Capone ran Chicago. He was the most feared gangster in America, a man who had people killed for far less than fraud, and Victor Lustig walked into his world and asked him for $50,000. But Lustig did not try to cheat Capone in the ordinary way. He was far too clever for that. He told Capone he had a sure investment, a deal that would double the money in a matter of months, and he asked the gangster to stake him $50,000 for it. Capone, intrigued by the polished count, handed over the cash. Then Lustig did the one thing nobody ever did to Al Capone. He gave it back. He took the $50,000 and he did not invest it in anything. He put it away, and he sat on it, untouched, for about 2 months. Then he returned to Capone, wearing a long face, and told him the deal had collapsed. The investment had fallen through. "And here," he said, "here is your money back, every dollar of it." He laid the full $50,000 on the table and apologized for failing. Capone was stunned. He had written off that money the moment it left his hands, the way you do with a gangster's loan. He had fully expected either to be paid double or to be cheated. He had never once expected to be paid back exactly, to the dollar, by an honest man who was sorry the deal went bad. In the world Capone lived in, such honesty did not exist. He was so moved, so disarmed, that he peeled off $5,000 from the returned stack and pressed it on Lustig, telling him to take it, telling him he was a good and honorable fellow who deserved something for his trouble. And that was the con. The whole time, the only thing Lustig ever wanted was that $5,000. He never intended to invest a penny. He had risked his life to make Al Capone trust him, and the trust itself was the payoff. He understood that the most valuable thing a man like Capone never received was honesty, and that a person who delivered it could name his reward. He walked out of the lion's den with the lion's gratitude and the lion's cash, and Capone never knew he had been played. By now you may be wondering how a man this careful, this brilliant at reading people, ever ended up in a cell. The answer is that the thing that finally destroyed Victor Lustig was not a con at all. It was a partnership, a printing press, and a woman. Around 1930, Lustig moved into the most dangerous business of his life. He stopped merely tricking people out of real money and started manufacturing fake money on a massive scale. He partnered with a Nebraska pharmacist named William Watts, a gifted engraver who cut the printing plates, and together they ran a counterfeiting operation that flooded the country with bogus banknotes. Lustig organized a network of couriers to pass the bills, many of them spreading the forgeries without even knowing the notes were fake. The fake cash went out by the thousands, month after month, into shops and banks across America. By one Secret Service estimate, before it was over, Lustig and his agents had passed something on the order of $2 million in counterfeit bills. The quality was so good and the volume so large that bankers began to worry the fakes could shake confidence in the dollar itself. The government took notice. The Secret Service made the case a priority and went hunting for the source. For a while, Lustig was untouchable because the man was a ghost. He had no fixed home. He moved between cities and hotels under his web of false names, and the agents chasing the flood of fake notes could not find the spring it flowed from. He might have run the operation for years more. But Lustig had a weakness, and it was the same weakness that brings down so many men. He could not stop himself from betraying the people closest to him. He kept a mistress, and he was carrying on with another woman at the same time. And when the first woman discovered she was being deceived, the charm that worked on bankers and gangsters failed completely on a woman scorned. The exact identity is something historians still argue over. Some accounts name a girlfriend. One well-sourced version points to a Pittsburgh madam named May Scheibel, burning with jealousy after Lustig borrowed her car and her affection and gave neither back. Whoever she was, she did the one thing André Poisson never could. She picked up a telephone and called the federal authorities, and she told them where to find him. In May of 1935, Secret Service agents arrested Victor Lustig on the streets of New York. The man who had slipped away from Paris, from a furious Texas sheriff, from Al Capone himself, was finally in handcuffs. And even then, even caught, he very nearly talked his way clear. He was smooth and unbothered. The counterfeiting charge was serious, but the agents needed the plates, the physical engraved plates used to print the fakes, to truly nail him. Lustig insisted he knew nothing about any plates. It was a key that betrayed him. When they searched him, the agents found a key, and Lustig would not say what it opened. They worked at it until they traced it to a rented locker in a subway station beneath Times Square. Inside that locker, they found around $50,000 in counterfeit bills, and the printing plates themselves, the evidence that turned a strong case into an airtight one. The ghost had left his fingerprints in a coin locker in the heart of New York. Still, Lustig was not finished. On the 1st of September 1935, the night before his trial was to begin, he gave the world one last performance. He was being held in the Federal Detention Center in Manhattan, a building people called the Tombs. He complained of illness, worked his way to a window, and there he tied bedsheets together into a makeshift rope and lowered himself down the outside of the building, several stories above the street. When passers-by looked up at the man dangling against the brick, he is said to have made a show of wiping the glass, pretending to be a window washer hard at work, until his feet touched the pavement and he simply walked away into the city. It was the kind of escape that belongs in a movie, equal parts daring and absurd, and it was pure Lustig to the last. He stayed free for 27 days. They caught up with him in Pittsburgh in late September, and this time there would be no more escapes and no more talking his way out. The trial that followed was brief because the case was overwhelming. Faced with the plates, the counterfeit cash, the witnesses, and his own theatrical jailbreak, Victor Lustig pleaded guilty. The court sentenced him to 15 years for the counterfeiting and added 5 more for his escape from the Tombs, 20 years. And the place they sent him to was the one prison built precisely for men like him, men too clever and too slippery for an ordinary jail. They sent him to the Rock in San Francisco Bay. They sent him to Alcatraz. There the man of 45 names became a number. The prison records list him as inmate 300, under the name Miller. The same man who had dined at the Krillon and lectured Al Capone on honest dealing, now spent his days in a concrete cell on an island, surrounded by cold water, with nothing left to sell and no one left to charm. There is a story, perhaps polished by the telling, that a Secret Service man once looked at him and said, "Count, you are the smoothest con man that ever lived." And Lustig, true to himself, is supposed to have answered, "I wouldn't say that. After all, you have conned me." He lasted years on the Rock. His health failed by inches. In the spring of 1947, sick and worn down, he was moved off the island to a federal medical center in Springfield, Missouri. There, on the 11th of March, Victor Lustig died, brought down at last not by a detective or a rival, but by an infection in his brain, by simple disease, the one mark that cannot be flattered or fooled. He was 57 years old. On his death certificate, an official wrote down his occupation in plain words that he might almost have appreciated. Apprentice salesman. The man who sold the Eiffel Tower twice was buried quietly, and for a time, the world nearly forgot him. So what do we make of him now, nearly a century later? It is tempting to enjoy Victor Lustig as a kind of rogue hero, the charming trickster who fooled the gullible and humbled the mighty, and there is no denying he was magnificent at what he did. But strip away the polish and look at what the con actually was, because it has not gone anywhere. Lustig's real talent was never forgery or sleight of hand. His real talent was reading the hunger in another person and using it as a handle to turn them. He found a man, André Poisson, who wanted so badly to be respected that he would believe an absurd story rather than admit he was being played. He found a sheriff and a string of marks who wanted free money so much they handed over real money to get it. He found Al Capone, a man so starved for honesty that he paid for the illusion of it. In every case, the con did not work because Lustig was a genius and his victims were fools. It worked because he found the exact thing each person wanted to be true, and then he simply agreed with them. The lie was never really his, it was theirs. He just sold it back to them. That is why this story still matters, and why it is not really a story about an old tower or a dead criminal at all. The men who lose to a con are almost never stupid. They are ambitious, or lonely, or proud, or greedy. The same things every one of us is on some afternoon. The next time something arrives that feels a little too good, the secret opportunity, the sure investment, the deal you were specially chosen for, the voice on the phone that knows just what you want to hear, remember the scrap dealer standing at the foot of the Eiffel Tower, certain he was the smartest man in Paris. The most dangerous lie you will ever be told is the one you were already hoping was true. If you want more forgotten true stories like this one, the kind history left in the margins, you know what to do.